Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight on a Friday night. I applaud your commitment to environmental science. I'm going to go ahead and just open up right away here with a poll. As people are coming in, I was thinking about how I used to love traveling so much, and now we really can't go anywhere. I haven't flown on a plane in over a year, and that's probably the longest that I've ever gone without traveling somewhere. And I was just really missing visiting my family in Chicago and being able to go to Culver's, which is around Chicago. If any of you have ever been there, you might know that they sell fried cheese curds as a side. And if you do live in the Midwest, that might be like normal, like something you can get every day, but you cannot get that where I am. There's nowhere, I was thinking about it, and there's nowhere I could even go to get that right now. So if you have had fried cheese curds, vote that in the poll. We're getting some people voting, what is that? Those people might be from California, like I am originally, and I had not known what a fried cheese curd was, but it's magic. It's magic. And I hope that once all of this is done with the pandemic, you can travel to a place where you can experience fried cheese curds. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, and also I did want to say for the polls, they do appear right under the chat. So if you are looking for them and you are confused as to what we are talking about, that is where the polls appear. So this is a good one to try and find out. Let's see, chat is going. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. We can show our results first. We are unanimous here. Why isn't it showing? There we go. We are unanimous here in what is that for fried cheese curds. So I really hope that we get to all go experience that again someday soon. They're amazing, especially with ranch. And that's what I will do as soon as we can travel again. All right, enough about cheese curds. Let's talk about environmental science. Today we are going to be doing Unit 5. Heads up again, your screen names, I can see them, and I might say your name, or someone else can see it too, so change your name if you don't want us to see it. Please follow us if you are not already on all of our social media platforms so that you can see the latest on what we are doing, what we are up to. We don't just offer AP support. There are other things like college prep and different access to internships, really great stuff that you can get involved with, and a great community to be a part of. And this is what we still have to do in this CRAM season, about halfway, a little over halfway done now with just the content, and then we will go into free response a little bit later. And trivia today, we had voted for this CRAM that we were, for the most part, going to go over everything in Unit 5, and it is a beast. There's a lot. So in order to do all of that, we're not going to have too much time for like multiple choice questions as we go. I did write the trivia though, as I was like building this slide deck. So the questions they go like right along with this. Please go to trivia and test your knowledge afterwards. That way you can really find out if you need to target more studying onto Unit 5 or you feel pretty confident with where you're at. All right, and this is what I was talking about. There is an immense amount of content in Unit 5. So we are going to just go rapid fire as much as possible. The key things that you need to know for each piece. And yeah, we're gonna go through it as quickly as we can without being too overwhelming here. Also wanted to say hi to Miriam. She is here in the chat and she can answer any questions that you guys have as they pop up as well. She could probably answer them faster than I can while I am talking as we move through this. All right, jumping right into it. Tragedy of the Commons. Tragedy of the Commons is a theory. It was a paper that was written. And this is an idea that humans will always pursue self-interest rather than the common good. I'm gonna let that sink in. They're always going to pursue their self-interest rather than common good. And so my favorite way to think about this is the Halloween candy bowl. that is considered a commons. Anything that people are supposed to share is a commons. So the Halloween candy bowl is sitting there, and people are, for the most part, always going to they're going to pursue their self-interest, meaning that a lot of times people are going to take more than just one piece of candy. And not everyone's going to take the entire candy bowl, because, that socially might seem like a little unacceptable. So we have that social pressure to not do things like that. But you might take 2, right? Maybe 3. That's not going to hurt anybody. And that mentality, if everybody thinks like that, like, well, I'll just take 3 candies, that's not going to hurt anybody. It would. If there was 100 people trying to go to that candy bowl, not everybody would be able to get a candy. If you took 3 and so did the next person and the next person, eventually that would harm kind of the people at the end of the line. They wouldn't get any. And that same concept applies really, really well to environmental science. So a commons could be the park outside of your house. It could be Yellowstone National Park. It could be the entire Pacific Ocean. Anything that people are sharing is a commons, and we all have to work together to make sure that it is protected and we all have equal access to it. And so ways that we can protect it are laws. Like, you could make a law that you can only have 1 candy from the candy bowl. And if you did take 2, then you are going to get a fine or go to jail. So that would be how a law would help protect a commons. Or privatizing it. So you could say, instead of having the candy bowl where we could each go like pick our favorite one and have that experience of going to the candy bowl, the government is going to come and give you 1 candy, and that's the candy that you get, and no more, and that's it. You don't get the experience of going to the candy bowl. So that would be the idea of like privatizing it. Both ideas work, and as well, the other kind of idea is just like social pressure. So like, if we all told the person who took the entire candy bowl we were very disappointed in them and they felt really bad about it, then that sort of thing too also protects commons. So social pressure to protect it. Real life examples, again, the oceans. Outside of a radius out of every country, which I believe, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I believe it's about 30 miles, then oceans are international waters, and it doesn't belong to any one nation. And a lot of ocean creatures don't just hang out in one spot. They move around, huge migrations. So the whales are an example. Whales all move to cold areas to eat, and then they move to warm areas to reproduce. So when all the whales, let's say all the whales are up near Alaska, if the citizens of Alaska decided, you know what, we're going to harvest all of the whales this year, that would impact everyone else, especially the people who live in Hawaii, whose livelihood are based on the whales, on tourism, and they'd be like, well, that wasn't really fair. You killed them all. And we needed those. So coming up with laws are really important. It's difficult sometimes when you want to come up with laws for different nations, though. So you can't just say like whaling's illegal, because we can't enforce laws on people of a different country. Let's say like Australians wanted to kill a bunch of whales. We can't tell them what to do. We could go to war, or we could do embargoes or things like that to try and force them to. But again, it's better if it's more like a socially acceptable thing, like, hey, we're all not going to kill the whales, and it would be really cool if you didn't do it either. And everyone kind of jumps on board to do what is mutually decided as the right thing. Other examples would be hunting numbers. Like, that's why there are laws where maybe you can only take 2 mallard ducks a season, or maybe you can only kill 1 deer a season. You have to have a tag to go kill it. So hunting is regulated. Otherwise, we would make wild animals go extinct. And then pollution. Air is a commons. So if you live next to a factory, then and they're polluting it, then they are destroying your commons. So for that, there's typically are laws to protect our air and water so that it is not polluted. Okay, switching gears a little bit, talking about clear cutting. Clear cutting is a way that we harvest trees or plant matter, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is cutting down all of the plants in a given area So it is the logging of a forest in a way that all the vegetation is removed from the logged area. Often only soil is left behind, or there are some wood products left behind. In this picture, I'm not sure if they would have like left that there. It seems awfully wasteful. They probably would have come back and got those large pieces of trees that are left. They could be ground down and turned. Oftentimes, new furniture, new cheaper furniture isn't made out of like a solid board anyways. It's made out of like mulch. So you kind of chip up and break it down all that wood and then smash it together with glue to form the pieces that you want to build furniture. So that's still a valuable resource. What happens when you do this is like obviously you're destroying the natural environment. You know, the deer that lived there before can no longer live there. But in addition, what happens is all of those trees that were there, they're dead. The roots are going to die. That the tree is no longer a living thing, as well as like all the smaller plants that were there. And like on a side note, typically what happens when they clear cut is they're going to be coming through with like machines and cutting down all these trees. And in a forest, it's very thick and dense on the bottom with like smaller plants or ferns, baby trees, and they don't want to have to deal with like those being in their way. So a lot of times they come through like a month ahead of time and they spray it with like a pesticide that kills plants to kill all that stuff. And then when that stuff's like kind of out of the way, then they come back a few months later and they take out all the trees that they want. It makes it easier to remove stuff. So again, now that everything is dead in that area, if it rains, we had just talked about soil and soil erosion. All of that soil is going to wash away. And then again, when we talked about primary and secondary succession, that soil is an extremely valuable resource. And if it all washes away, you're not going to be able to have a quick regrowth like you would if there was soil there. And then in addition, that soil is now entering waterways. It's called sedimentation when you have a lot of dirt in the water. And that's going to be harmful for fish. It literally clogs their gills. They can't breathe. Or it can cause a eutrophication event if you have like a huge influx of nutrients into a river or an ocean. And it is often done in chunks. And the idea behind that is that, I mean, it is trying to be more environmentally friendly. So here's a picture of what it looks like. And if any of you do live in the Pacific Northwest, as you're driving along in like the highways, you can see this. If you just like look up into the mountains, it'll be like beautiful green forest. And then there are just like patches of nothing. And that is where they have done clear cutting and it has been logged. So the idea was, if you're looking at this picture, instead of doing one space that was the sum of all of those areas together, you know, if you double the space you're going to impact, but just do it in patches, the theory is that it will grow back faster. And that's because, as we know, a lot of times plants put their seeds and things down using like wind or animals moving stuff. So it's kind of by chance. If you have a giant open field, it's going to take forever stuff to get into the middle of that field, you know, by chance. But if you have a bunch of smaller fields, in theory, they would all grow back faster. So that is an attempt to make it more environmentally friendly when they're doing clear cutting. And I know that there are some groups that go in and they do the removal of all the undergrowth, you know, by hand. This is a very efficient way of getting wood products. And as a society, we need wood products. We need tables and coffee cups and different things made of paper. So this is an efficient, cost-efficient way of doing it. And then the idea with these patches is that like the animals will just move. So like if you were living right here, just go over there and you'll be okay. So I guess that kind of makes sense. And that is what typically would occur in the area. It would cause more competition just from the lack of space and food. But for the most part, they're not destroying the entire ecosystem, just little chunks of it. All right, and the Green Revolution. So the Green Revolution is a little bit, it makes, whenever we hear the word green, it sort of has this connotation now that it means environmental. And that's not necessarily the case with the Green Revolution. It doesn't necessarily mean eco-friendly. The Green Revolution was a massive shift in how we farm to make things to just make more food. Kind of what we talked about with carrying capacity. Humans originally were just like walking around catching animals and finding food as they moved. And then they decided to farm. And then in order to live in cities and to have this massive population that we currently have, we have to do some specialized farming techniques that use a lot of new technology. And that's what the Green Revolution was. So it's like a revolution of farming techniques. So again, they're not all eco-friendly. And here are just a list of some of what was included in that group is genetically modified organisms. So GMOs came around as a way to be able to grow more food faster. GMOs can be plants or animals. They can be modified in order to resist pests, so you don't have to spray pesticides or very much pesticides on them. They can be modified to grow really fast. They can be modified to grow with less water, different things like that. So GMOs allowed us to grow food faster. Fertilization techniques, so being able to apply nutrients to land that typically did not have it in mass quantities, allowed us again to grow food. Pest management strategies, so we've been able to change the way in which we deal with pests so that we don't lose crops. Irrigation methods is huge. The massive amount of water that we move from one place to another in order to grow crops is absolutely insane. And that is where a lot of the available fresh water goes. So that's our picture there with the sprinklers. That water could be coming from thousands of miles away because of different aqueducts that we've made in order to redirect it. Monocropping. Originally, farming was done at your house. Everyone grew what they were going to eat. So, and if you had like a surplus or you were really good at something, maybe you could sell that for some money or you could trade with someone else. But, if you wanted to have carrots, you had to grow them. And then we figured out that you could just have one guy grow carrots and he's really good at it and he'll have a huge farm of carrots and then we'll all just go to the store and buy those carrots and it's cheaper because he's really good at it and it works out better. That does mean that there's like a travel cost, right? So now you have to like ship the carrots from one place to another. But overall, it makes food really cheap because you can just grow it all in one spot instead of having everybody trying to figure out how to do it. Mechanization is the use of tools. So farm equipment is incredibly complicated and cool. We have some really fun machines that are used to harvest different things. I saw this video the other day on harvesting raspberries, and there's like one machine that's out in the field and it kind of shakes the plant as it goes over the top of them, like huge fields of raspberries, and it collects all the raspberries that fall down, and then they have a person on the machine sorting it right there in the field, and then it puts it into bins to then come in and be washed. But it's so cool. Like if you think about what the amount of time it would take for a person to walk around and pick raspberries and like put them in a little container for you, it would not be cost effective. Like you can think about how much you'd have to pay that person to do that, whereas this machine just like drives around and does it all really fast. So that has allowed us to, again, really just get a lot of food with a lot less effort. The last part is a concentrated animal feeding operation, a CAFO. And this is kind of, I guess, and we'll talk more about this. These are where people start to feel like maybe it is being inhumane, but we've sort of figured out what is like the minimum space, food and water you need and time to grow an animal to optimal size to harvest for food. So we are able to like kind of cram a bunch of animals into a little bit of space, give them food and water really fast, and grow them into food in an ideal or optimal time span. Okay, so some of the impacts of these agricultural practices. And agriculture, again, is like any sort of farming. Agricultural practices inherently alter the natural environment and can have widespread impacts. Conversions of natural ecosystems, you're going to have a loss of biodiversity. And that's why I love this picture below. This is a picture of a palm farm where they make palm oil. And on the other side would be the Amazon rainforest. So Amazon rainforest is the most diverse land biome. And it's not the most diverse overall, because again, that's the coral reef, but it's the most diverse land biome. So there are just hundreds and hundreds of different species of trees and animals living right there. And then you have this like tiny little divide, and then just one thing is growing. And it would be very unlikely that there would be like a lot of animals or insects or anything even living in those palms, because of spraying of pesticides as well. They don't want them there. So a very interesting picture with just a few very small biodiversity and then incredibly large biodiversity. Often in order to clear the land to farm something else, as we learned with primary and secondary succession, things grow back really fast, and that's when you have soil. To add on to that, when you burn stuff, it leaves a very nutrient-rich soil behind. So it makes sense, like instead of like, if you were given the task to build a farm here on the left side of that picture, are you going to go over there and like with an axe and cut down all the trees and like cut down all the little plants? And then you have to like put them somewhere. So you like move them out of there. You have to get trucks and stuff. Or you could just catch it on fire and it'll burn down, and then the soil will be really nutrient rich. So it does make sense to do. So you go ahead and burn the forest, and then you could plant your crops right behind it, or on top of it, I guess. So slash and burn agriculture is a huge deal. It happens a lot. It generates a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere just from burning all those trees, because the bodies of those trees then all are released as gas into the atmosphere when burned. Another impact of agricultural practices is the use of fertilizers and eutrophication. So again, that excess fertilizer getting into waterways, causing algae to bloom, and then that algae dying. When it does die, it decomposes. That decomposition is a metabolic experience, and so that's going to use up the oxygen in the water and cause hypoxic conditions. And that is the process of eutrophication. Those hypoxic areas are then going to be dead zones where no fish or anything can live, because there's no oxygen in the water. And then again, pesticides. So spraying pesticides in any of these areas is going to cause loss of life to organisms that were intended, and unintentional organisms as well. And again, as we're going, if you have any questions that pop up, please put them in the chat. All right, so let's talk a little bit about irrigation. So irrigation is watering things. And so how do we bring water to farms and water to plants? Irrigation is any man-made method to bring water from one place to another, typically with the intention of farming. And I tried to make this fun way for you to remember which one of these are expensive and how much water they waste. So drip irrigation is that first one. It's very expensive to set up, but it doesn't waste hardly any water. And that's what's going on in that picture we have there. So that is drip irrigation. Those dark circles are like wet spots. And what's happening is underneath the ground there. It doesn't always have to be under the ground. Sometimes they're above ground, but it's like a tube, like a hose. So let's pretend you like ran a hose down, and then every 6 inches you poked a hole in the hose, and a little bit of water would come out of that hole every time you turn the water on. So if you poked that hole right on top of every plant that you've planted, you're watering just that plant. You're not throwing the water in the air to get it there. It's literally just appearing right at the roots of that plant. It's going to be highly efficient in saving water. But you have to like set up all these hoses everywhere. Hoses dry out and break, and you have to replace them. So it is really intensive, but it is definitely the best as far as saving water. The next one is going to be spray irrigation. That's sprinklers. So that's definitely what you're used to seeing with sprinklers. Sorry, that picture is of the last one. I didn't put a picture for sprinklers because we all know what that is. Or maybe I put a picture, but it got move to the second one. We'll see. So sprinklers are the next. You do waste a lot of water because it's like flying around in the air and it's not going exactly where it needs to go, or it is evaporating. And they are expensive. You still have to have pipes and these like sprinkler mechanisms and set that all up. The last two are very close. Let me see if we have our sprinkler picture. We do. There's our sprinkler. Sorry, they're just out of order. Okay, the last two, flood and furrow irrigation, are very similar. The idea is that you flood the entire field. So you just like turn the hose on and let the field get entirely full of water. The slight difference is this picture is furrow irrigation because it has the divots, like the little divots where the water sits. This way the plants, because some plants don't want to be flooded. Like if you flood your plants, they're going to drown and die. And so these ones are above the water, so they can still breathe. They're getting enough oxygen in, and they're not going to get waterlogged and rot. But there is just like the water table, the water is just right below the plants there in those furrows. And so again, that's furrow irrigation, and flood irrigation would be the exact same thing. It would just be like you wouldn't take the time to dig those divots in the field. The field would just be flat, and then you would flood it with water. And that's very often done in like rice fields. There's our sprinklers again. So again, each of these have their potential problems with costs. How expensive is it to get the water there? Flooding, is it going to flood the field? Is that going to damage the field? Are you going to have erosion problems? And then evaporation, how much of the water is actually getting into the plant and how much is going to the wrong place or being lost to evaporation? All right, we are doing good. We're already halfway through this CRAM, so we are flying. All right, pest control methods. These are anything that humans use, could be chemical or physical methods to control pests. Each of these methods have their own pros and cons based on cost, environmental impact, and their effectiveness. So a pest is anything that we don't want where it is. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that animal is a pest or a plant is a pest in general or somewhere else, or the classification of a pest is just any sort of organism that is somewhere that humans don't want it to be. So like I know when we're like outside looking at plants or flowers and like, is this a weed? Is this a pest? I don't know, depends if you don't want it there. So there's not like specific things necessarily or animals that are classified under that. Okay, so some of the benefits of using these, controlling pests is going to increase crop yield. If you control the number of or total of crop that's lost to pests, so let's use like tomatoes, and let's say that there's a beetle eating the tomatoes. If you lose half of your tomatoes to beetles, that's going to be really expensive, and it's going to drive up the cost of tomatoes. And you know, you wasted all that fuel, energy, carbon dioxide to plant the tomatoes and to get it going, and time to grow them. And now we don't have food for people. So again, pest control methods are extremely valuable because they allow us to grow more food and get it to people. And if you go to the grocery store and look at the produce, it is perfect. The produce that's in your typical grocery store is absolutely perfect. It's beautiful. There are no bug bites on it. And that is all attributed to the Green Revolution and to these pest control methods, and that we are able to grow. And you think about it, the tomato that you ate was grown outside, and it is sort of remarkable that it didn't get eaten or touched at all by an insect. And that is because of these methods that were used on it. Typically, unless it is an organic tomato, it is because there were poisons that were used in order to control insect numbers in that area. Typically, unintentional species are harmed. It's almost impossible to develop a poison that is specifically for that one species of beetle that is going after the tomatoes. So whether or not that poison acts on the nervous system of insects, or it stops their reproduction, or what it does, whatever chemical that is, also impacts other creatures in the ecosystem, and maybe even us, because we are also consuming that poison. And sometimes those poisons then get out into the environment, whether it's in those insects or if it's in runoff, and then it moves up the food chain. And that's why I have a picture of an eagle here. We realized almost too late that DDT was killing eagles, or it was causing the extinction of eagles. Adult eagles were not harmed by DDT, and DDT, again, was a really widespread insecticide that was used to kill insects. They used it a lot to control mosquito populations, and there are like these old black and white type videos of these like little trucks, looked like little golf carts almost, that would drive around and spray DDT, and like people would be like, "Ooh, spray me, because then I won't get bit by mosquitoes today while I'm hanging out by the lake." And so they had videos of just like spraying all the people by the lake who were just like sunbathing. And then we figured out that like, oh, DDT might cause cancer, so maybe we shouldn't spray ourselves with it. But they also figured out it bioaccumulates. So if a bunch of little bugs eat the tomatoes with DDT on it, they then have it in their bloodstream. And then if they are consumed by fish that are then consumed by bigger fish, every time it goes up a trophic level, remember we had talked about like energy moving up a trophic level, you can look at those pyramids for bioaccumulation as well. So every time these chemicals move up a trophic level, they are going to just continue to grow in their concentration. So by the time they get to a top predator like an eagle, it has massive amounts of these chemicals in its body. And it was not allowing them to lay eggs properly. The eggs were soft. So the poor mama eagle is trying to sit on her eggs, and she's crushing them on accident. And so as a result, there's just no baby eagles born for a really long time, or very few baby eagles born. And it really caused a crash to that population. So that is an important event to know. It was a big turning point kind of in the US when we realized like, hey, maybe we should take a better look at what we're doing here, and slow things down, because we're having an impact on things that we didn't think we were going to have an impact on. And I just threw up a poll question as well. My question to you is, what book highlighted the use of pesticides in the US? Was it An Inconvenient Truth, An Uninhabitable Earth, or Silent Spring? And then the last thing kind of to talk about with pest control is that pests become resistant to poisons. And that's not necessarily like the individual. So that's important to know, that an individual is not going to become resistant. It would be more that a species would become resistant. So let's say we have a field of tomatoes and we spray it with DDT, and half of the insects die. The half that didn't die are going to pass on their genetics for being resistant to DDT. And then we're like, dang it, okay, let's spray it with twice as strong of DDT next year. And then again, half of the insects die. Well, the ones that live that time are really strong, and they're going to live to pass on their genetics. And this is going to happen year after year after year until you have insects that you can't kill with DDT. They just, you've weeded out all the ones that did die from it. And now you have some that are just resistant to that poison, and you're gonna have to switch to a different poison. All right, most of us got this one. Let's publish our results. Silent Spring. Rachel Carson wrote that book. It was written right around the time when people were figuring out what was going on with DDT and the eagles. And it did talk about how humans are kind of just willy-nilly spraying poisons all through the environment, and it is going to have long-term effects, like there aren't going to be birds anymore, kind of stuff. So really good book talking about how humans are impacting the environment. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about those meat production methods and CAFOs. In order to keep up with growing demand for meat, animals are often farmed in confined spaces called concentrated animal feeding operations. And so that's a picture of sheep that are being farmed in a confined space. The pros to that is we can make a lot of meat, and humans like eating meat. Americans like eating meat, and we don't like spending a lot for it. We want to be able to get a $1 cheeseburger whenever we want to. And in order to do that, we have to sacrifice some things. You can't have a free-range cow that's going to take years to get to its full size, and it's going to walk around enjoying lots of space, because we just don't have enough space. We are limited as far as where we can have. We're limited in land total, so we can't have it all be covered by cows because we need spaces to live as well. So in short, it is very efficient to use these. But some of the cons is that it might be considered inhumane, and there definitely have been some laws passed, like to try and look out for the welfare of the animals. Definitely laws as far as saying that animals need to be able to stand up and turn around if they want to, which seems like minimal to be okay, but it's true. So that's like one of the laws. They have to be able to stand up and turn around. You have to have like airflow moving through there, and things like that. So as well, they generate a ton of waste. So you can imagine all of these sheep are just hanging out in this space, and this is like their whole life. They don't go anywhere else. So they're going to be generating a lot of waste as they go to the bathroom, and it's going to have to be washed out of this place. And where does that go? You know, if you are downriver from a CAFO, all of that nutrients from their waste product is going to be washing into riverways. So a lot of times we can like recoup it. So it can be like harvested essentially and turned into fertilizer, or moved to other places so it can be disposed of. But it definitely has to be dealt with. It can't just be like allowed to, it will build up first of all, and it can't just be like allowed to enter natural waterways. And then in order to feed all of these animals, we have to farm a lot of grain. So in order to, remember back to our pyramid, as far as how much energy moves up, in order to make like a pound of meat, you're going to need to have 10 pounds of grain, roughly, right? So in order to generate that, anyways, so you're going to have to, the same kind of goes for space too. So I believe it's 20 times. So to make 1 pound of meat, or to like have to, in order to generate a certain amount of meat, you're going to need 20 times more space than you would need to generate that in like grain, because you're going to need 20 times more space to grow the grain to feed to the animals. If that makes sense. Maybe I said that confusing. I'll try and reword it. So in order to generate the same amount of calories from meat as you could from plants, you're going to need 20 times more land space in order to grow the food to feed the animals. So it is extremely expensive environmentally to grow meat, to have meat. And a lot of the meat that we consume doesn't come from the US because it is so expensive. It is cheaper to buy it from other countries. I know Brazil is a major export of meat. A lot of the beef that we have is actually from Brazil, and you can check on the meat that you buy. A lot of times it says where it's from, or if it was US grown. And then you can also try, and if you want like free range food, then that means that those animals were allowed to like go outside or move around a little bit. So again, that it would be more expensive though, because you'd have to have a lot more land in order to grow them. All right, moving to impacts of overfishing. So again, we talked about fishing is our commons, and the ocean is the world's largest commons. We are all sharing it. Fish is a really unique thing that we still eat because it's like something that we catch wild. So think about it. I don't know if you or your family members hunt, and so you get to have like deer or duck or elk or something like that was hunted. If you don't, the only thing that you probably eat that was hunted was fish. And it's kind of weird to think about because we eat it as if it's like beef or chicken that was farmed, but it's not. So it's something that we had to like have a boat go out into the ocean and find it and catch it. And we are not putting anything into that system. So like with a cow, a farmer is feeding the cows, growing them, and then harvesting them. With fishing, we're just like going out and taking. We're not putting anything back to try and grow more fish in general. So that's a really unique thing that we are all still doing, like all of us as humans are still taking from the ocean. And how long can it support that with everybody just sort of taking whatever they want with no real boundaries? And the answer is it cannot support it anymore. It is not supporting it. Almost all major fisheries have crashed, and we are not seeing fish in the numbers they used to be in or in the sizes they used to be in. We figured out, turns out some fish take a really long time to grow. And so like bluefin tuna takes an extremely long time to grow to a size where it's like caught and to eat, like 50 years to grow. So, and some other, like the orange roughy is a fish that we were like all about for a while. People always wanted orange roughy. And we figured out that, that fish lives for like 100 years and it doesn't reproduce until it's 20 years old. It's really not sustainable to be eating this little fish. So definitely a place where we have made a huge impact. Let's see what else I have up here. So it's also still a major source of food for a lot of countries. So a lot of countries really rely on the ocean for the majority of their food and not farming. And the US as well, we do pull a ton of food from the ocean as our food. It also supports the pork industry. As a side note, pigs are omnivores. They're not vegetarians. So you have to, in order to grow pigs, you have to feed them meat product. And so a lot of fish are actually harvested and then fed to pigs. So eating pork, eating bacon is actually very environmentally costly because you are not only, you're eating like a second level consumer. So yeah. Also, in order to catch fish, because we are just randomly catching them, there's a ton of bycatch. Bycatch is a term given to any fish that's caught on accident that we did not mean to catch. Typically, it's all thrown back into the ocean. So let's imagine like if instead of like saying, I'm going to buy beef for dinner, I'm going to get a cow, instead you just drug a huge net around outside, like in the park. And you were like, oh, cool, I caught like 2 squirrels and a rabbit and a dog and a bunch of insects. And I want to eat the rabbit. So let's just throw everything back. But it's dead now. That's sort of how fishing goes. And you just kind of just catch what you want. And then you throw the other stuff back, just on a massive, massive scale. Huge amounts. And then let's see, moving on here. Impacts of mining. This unit is all over the place, by the way. So that's why we're jumping all over the place. But in general, it's just like how have humans affected natural resources. Okay, so mining is the act of removing any natural resource from the earth. Overburden is soil and stuff that was on top of the whatever you were looking for. So it's kind of like in the way. So they have to remove the overburden and then they can dig for what they want to get. And when they remove that overburden or soil, a lot of times it can wash away. It can be lost to like an erosion. And oftentimes chemicals are used in the extraction process in order to get whatever chemical or whatever product out of the earth we are looking to get. These are some of the different types of mining: mountaintop removal, shaft mining, fracking, contour mining are all different ways that we remove these products from the earth. And it is hard to fully fathom how big mines are until you see one. So I tried to get a picture for us to see. So in this picture, each one of those little layers you can see is a road. And so you drive like in circles down to the bottom. And if you look at the very zoom yourself in there to the bottom, you'll see there's a little tiny lake in the bottom. It's actually probably a pretty big lake. And then kind of up on the hill from there, there's a big truck. So if that gives you any idea of how massive this mine is, it's an enormous crater in the earth that has been dug out. All right, so impacts of urbanization and runoff. And again, urbanization is just the development of land into cities. So anytime we're building cities, we are building surfaces that are impervious, or they are not permeable, or means that water can't soak through them. Anytime that we prevent rainfall from naturally absorbing into the water, we are going to increase runoff, and we are going to decrease water in aquifers and in groundwater. So we are going to lose that natural water storage and filtration that normally occurs, and that water has a high potential to pick up pollutants and soil as it runs off of the land instead of absorbing in, often leading to flooding or increased pollution in waterways. Overall, the way to reduce our impact as humans is to build up and not out. So if we are living in a bunch of skyscrapers all really close together, then we are impacting less overall land. There's an interesting new documentary, or it's probably about a year old now, on Netflix. If you have time to watch it, it's the new David Attenborough one. And he sort of talks about how the best thing that we can do for the earth is just to not change it. So if we can just stop building out in the way that we are and building new houses and things like that, and instead just build up and leave as much land as possible untouched, then that is how we are going to save the earth or get things so that we can still live here in the future. And that kind of leads to our ecological footprint and sustainability. An eco footprint is the lasting impression a given person or group of people will have on the environment. So an eco footprint, that's just a term. It's not like a thing. It's a term to talk about, like, what is your personal impact on the world? Like, how big of an impact are you going to have? And it's something that we can actually like measure. So we can put like a number to it, like what's your eco footprint? And it gives us a way to compare people, or to compare groups of people, more importantly. And then like on average, a person in the US would tend to have a much bigger footprint than a person living in like a pre-industrialized country. And that's kind of why I have these pictures here. I have a picture of someone who is living in a nomadic type lifestyle, where they are living in like a yurt and they are herding animals and living off those animals, or living off the land around those animals. Very little lasting impact on the earth. And then on the right, I just have like a typical US household. We tend to drive cars, which pollute a lot. That's a lot of carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. That's a big impact that we can't get back. We have a lot of stuff. That stuff is typically going to be here for a really long time. And where is it going to go? It's going to go somewhere, and it's going to be here for hundreds of years, if not forever. And then just our homes in general make a big impact. We have to heat them. They take up a physical space that is no longer natural. And so that's something just interesting to think about, like how much actual impact do you have compared to maybe someone else? And we can try and mitigate it. Maybe you have a electric car that is better, but that electric car is still going to get old someday and have to be put in a landfill or somewhere as well. So just looking at our impact and how much of a lasting impact we each will have. Sustainability is humans using resources in a way that they will not deplete them faster than they can recover. So again, for something to be called sustainable, I know that term is thrown around a lot, but for something to be actually sustainable, that term means that it is going to replenish as fast as we're using it. So is it sustainable to use a plastic cup? Is it sustainable to use a paper cup? Is it sustainable to have to-go cups at all? Is it sustainable to have a permanent metal cup that you use? don't know. So that's kind of the question: is sustainability? Is will it recover faster than we are using it? Okay, so again, that term sustainable, talking about agriculture. So how can we make agriculture or farming replenish in a way that it replenishes as quickly as we are using it, so we are not destroying anything? Soil conservation is one. Again, we talked about that no-till farming. Let's not have all the soil wash away and be lost. Let's protect the soil. Water conservation, if you put drip irrigation in, then we are not going to be losing massive amounts of water. We're not going to run out of water. I know sometimes it's the blame or the responsibility is pushed to different groups, and we say things like, oh, we need to conserve water, you should take a 4-minute shower. Well, people in homes use so little water compared to how much water is wasted in like agricultural processes, or even how much water is wasted on our lawns. If you live somewhere with a grass lawn, that is a huge waste of water if you have to water it frequently, especially if you live somewhere where grass doesn't grow naturally. Like if you live in Arizona and you have a grass lawn, that is a massive waste of water. So conserving water definitely in a way where it makes a big impact instead of focusing on like little tiny things that might not make an impact overall. Integrated pest management is a way of using natural and non-toxic means to control pests. Some of those are like rotating crops, because if you get infestation of beetles that love tomatoes and then the next year you put in potatoes, they're going to be like, oh, that's gross, and they're going to leave. But if you put in tomatoes year after year after year after year, you're going to have a massive population of that one beetle. So again, rotating crops is one way of dealing with that. Another way is by using natural means, and that's why I have this picture of a pear with a ladybug. Ladybugs are actually like predatory insects, and they eat other insects. So, and they don't harm because they're like carnivores. They don't harm the plants at all. So if you just release a whole bunch of ladybugs into your field, they're going to eat all of the other harmful insects, and they're not going to harm your fruit. So they are great to have around. Doing things like rotational grazing. So you can say we're going to have cows on this field this year, but not next year, and we're going to allow the field to recover. Or by fertilizing using green manure in like instead of using chemical fertilizers, you can say, okay, once we harvest this crop, there's still a lot of plant matter on the field. Let's release 100 goats out into the field and have them like run around and clean up the rest of this plant matter. And they're going to poop everywhere, and that's going to be manure or fertilizer that we could use. So using methods like that and bringing that in is going to be really environmentally friendly in the long run. Aquaculture is the farming of fish, basically farming of anything that lives in the water. So it could be fish, crustaceans, mollusks. Mollusks are going to be like clams, oysters, or octopus, and then algae. It generates a lot of food, and it protects wild populations. So you're not going to be harvesting wild fish anymore if now you're farming them. And again, so what you put in, you get out. So we are like generating these now that we're farming them instead of just hunting wild things. The cons, that's a picture of like a fish farm. Imagine all of those fish, you're just dumping food in there every day and they're all just like pooping. So that's a ton of nitrogen waste that's going to be coming out of this fish farm, and it could harm the natural ecosystem around it. If you have GMOs living there, which we do have some GMO fish that we farm, they could escape. And then now you've got like contaminated outside fish populations when they interbreed with each other. And yeah, one of the really cool things or really cool organisms, so let's say that's a fish farm. What they've figured out is if you surround that fish farm with oyster farms, when you have a eutrophication event, so all those fish are pooping, they put a bunch of nitrogen in the water, that makes a bunch of algae grow, and now you're like bordering where you're going to have that whole collapse in hypoxic conditions and everything's going to die. If you have like a bunch of oyster farms in there, oysters filter feed, and they will filter feed out all the algae. So they will prevent a eutrophication event, and then you've got oysters, which is awesome because now you've got two things that you farmed without causing an environmental impact. Ooh, okay, we did it. We flew through all of it, and this is Unit 6. This is what we are going to talk about next time. Unit 6 is all about energies, and I am going to ask you a poll here again. Our last one. All right, when talking about energies, do you feel like you need more information or more help on renewables or non-renewables? We're getting a lot of votes on this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and publish those results. Pretty similar, maybe a little bit more on non-renewables. So I will focus a little bit more on that and how they are generated and where they are from. But I did want to say thank you for everybody for joining us today. And please join us over on Discord. We are going to keep the conversation going. If you do have any questions or anything that you want to see covered more next time, please put it there. If we have a lot of votes for one thing or have a common topic coming up, then I can make sure to cover that in the next one. But again, thank you so much for everyone for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful Friday night and you can relax a little bit and not do some schoolwork for a little while. All right, thanks everyone. See you next time.